Graduation Day, a day filled with family, friends, and inspirational speeches challenging the next generation of graduates to take risks, push boundaries, chase their dreams, and live life to the fullest. A day filled with loud roars of applause, eager mothers lined up to capture the moment their child walks across that stage, and of course, a day filled with excitement and ear-to-ear smiles, marking the first day of freedom as 16 years of lectures and coursework come to an end. But for many, the exhilaration of graduation quickly dwindles when these graduates come face to face with the financial realities of their freshly printed diploma. In the U.S. today, national student loan debt has surpassed the $1 trillion mark, nearly tripling in size between 2004 and 2012. In fact, student loan debt is now the largest non-mortgage debt burden in the U.S., rising another $33 billion in the third quarter 2013 alone. And as delinquency threatens one-third of graduated student loan borrowers who struggle to afford their monthly loan payments, another 20 million students will enroll in universities and colleges nationwide. While some may argue that access to student loans addresses today's demand for higher education, they may not be seeing the entire picture, including the associated societal risks of the mounting debt. What then are the possible long-term macroeconomic effects of the current student loan debt in the United States?
Let's take a look at the average student graduating from a U.S. college or university in the last year. Today's average student graduating with student loan debt leaves with approximately $27,000 in loan debt. Based on a standard repayment plan of 120 payments spread over 10 years, this average student will be expected to pay $270 monthly. This may not appear too bad at first glance, but with the average college graduate's net monthly income at approximately $2,000, and taking into consideration today's cost of living, many students are unable to meet these monthly student loan payments. The national default rate currently hovers around 13%, and once a student defaults on their loan, they will face a barrage of collections, wage garnishing, property seizures, and tarnished credit scores. And when we multiply this one graduate by the nearly 4 million degrees expected to be awarded this upcoming spring, there is no doubt that student loan debt is an issue, not just for these graduates, but for the nation as a whole.
To see the significant macroeconomic effect of student loans, we simply need to examine the push and pull of student loan debt in the overall GDP equation, specifically in government spending, investment, and consumption.
Let's start by looking at the government spending, as many of these student loan programs are funded directly from the federal government. On the one hand, government educational programs have worked hard to give money back to the consumer. In 2011, students and their parents saved $20 billion in federal education tax credits and tuition deductions. Thus, one may argue that as the government increases spending in the education sector, creating opportunities for colleges and students, they also attempt to increase consumption through these tax credits and tuition deductions. Unfortunately, student loan debt has greatly outpaced these tax credits, grants, and other government assistance programs. In the fiscal year 2013 alone, the government spent approximately $36 billion in grants, $32 billion in educational tax benefits, and $1 billion in work student programs, and over $107 billion in student loans. These student loans will appear as a deficit until those funds are recuperated. Although estimates vary based on different cost accounting methods, analysts predict that between 2010 and 2020, the student loan program will cost 12% more than it brings in. Therefore, as government spending on education increases GDP, there is a simultaneous increase in the government's already gigantic budget deficit. The next part of the GDP equation impacted by student loan debt is investment. Although student loan debt does not necessarily have obvious short-term push or pull on the GDP equation, it is important to look at investment on a long-term scale. Analysts estimate that an educational debt of approximately $50,000 will lead to a $200,000 lifetime wealth loss. Scaling this to a macro level, $1 trillion in student debt could cause up to $4 trillion of lifetime wealth loss. Much of this loss can be traced to a decrease in retirement security investing. 43% of young workers do not save enough for a full 401k employer match, and are more likely to cash out their retirement investments when changing jobs. These retirement savings are even further significantly delayed for student loan borrowers who are already struggling to pay a monthly loan payment and thus do not have the means to invest in retirement. Compounded over many years, these investments will greatly widen the gap between families with and without student loan debt. Furthermore, student debt obligations can discourage entrepreneurship and small business formation as the need for stability undermines risk-taking and innovation, stifling the ability to invest capital, market products, and hire employees. Again, although the short-term macroeconomic effects on investment may not be significant, the possible long-term effects are alarming. Historically, those who borrowed student loans to finance a college education became great consumers. A college degree generally meant increased future earnings, which led to increased disposable income. Additionally, those willing to borrow loans to finance a degree were more likely to borrow again to finance other major purchases like a home or a car. But this pattern has taken a dramatic turn in the last 3 years due to lowered expectations of future earnings, underemployment, and limited access to additional credit. With 48% of employed college graduates working jobs that do not require a college education, it's not surprising that nearly half of graduates with student loan debt have delayed major purchases. As disposable income and the marginal propensity to consume decreases, student loan borrowers become unhealthy consumers and the consumption function suffers. This rapid growth in student loan debt has economists and policymakers alike spotlighting similarities to the past housing crisis and whether or not student loan debt is the next bubble to burst. Peter Navarro sums it up perfectly when he warns that, without a healthy consumer, it is virtually impossible for any economy to enjoy sustained growth.
With decreasing consumption, decreasing investment, and increasing government spending resulting in a larger budget deficit, it is clear that student loan debt is an issue that deserves further research and analysis on a national level. Of course, with more than 38 million Americans facing outstanding student loan debt, this is not a problem that will be easily solved. However, there are several recommendations that could help minimize or manage student loan debt and its negative macroeconomic effects. These recommendations include determining loan amounts based on the economic return of a chosen college degree. Proponents of this recommendation argue that the type of degree, a student's high school GPA, and the institution the student will attend can all predict how much a student will make upon graduation and should therefore be used to determine their loan eligibility. Reducing government lending to higher education. This strategy argues that a reduction in government subsidy will force higher education to become more cost-effective and thus reduce loan indebtedness. Lowering student loan interest rates. Although student loan interest rates have already been reduced in recent years, some advocates of this strategy propose further reductions in interest rates in order to make repayment more manageable for borrowers. A fourth recommendation shifts the focus to primary and secondary education and calls for an increase in financial literacy through mandatory financial education in middle schools and high schools nationwide. This strategy centers on the premise that financial literacy will lead to wiser financial decisions for higher education. There are many more recommendations, from short-term policy amendments to long-term changes in the delivery methods of education. But one thing is clear. If student loan borrowing continues at the same pace as today, there will be negative, long-term consequences to the United States economy as a whole. But what do you think? What would the fathers of macroeconomics say? What should be done?